All right, whenever you're ready.
Hello, everybody. So today our topic is about gun control, and our proposition is that criminal background checks for all gun sales, including those by private sellers that are currently exempt, should be required. Now, before I get into my stock issues and our plan of action, I would like to talk about the definitions that are going to be used throughout the speech that might be helpful for you guys to understand, so you know where we're going with our proposition. The first being the NICS, which is the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, which is a point of sale system for determining eligibility to purchase a firearm in the United States of America. The second definition being background check, which is mandated by the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act of 1993 and launched by the FBI on November 30th, 1998. The NICS is used by the Federal Firearms License, which I will define after this definition, to instantly determine whether a prospective buyer is eligible to buy firearms or explosives, which is when, before the purchase, the cashier will call either the FBI or the designated agencies to ensure that each customer does not have a criminal record or isn't otherwise ineligible to make a purchase. And that brings me into background check fraud, which is when an agency or distributor sells a gun that doesn't perform or falsifies information being sent to the NICS during the purchasing process. And my fourth definition, which is a federal firearms license, this is required by law to use the NICS to determine if it's legal to sell a firearm to a prospective purchaser. It was launched by the FBI on November 30th, 1998, and it determines if the buyer is prohibited from buying a firearm under the Gun Control Act of 1968. It is linked to the National Crime Information Center and applicable to sales from federally licensed dealers. Now, let me give you a little bit of a background on our proposition, which is my first being that the National Firearms Act in 1934. This was the first attempt at federal gun control legislation, and on June 26, 1934, it levied a $200 tax on each firearm and for any transfer involving firearms. The violation would be if it was not appropriately sold by the guns were not appropriately sold by the seller, would be a fine of $2,000 and imprisonment of up to 5 years if violating it. The second fact of history that I want you guys to know is the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968 and the Gun Control Act of 1968. This was actually really significant because it was spurred by the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. After these events, President Johnson renewed the fight for gun control, and he had the passage of the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968, along with the Gun Control Act of 1968 in October 22nd, 1968. This becomes a federal law regulating firearms. It prohibits all convicted felons and drug users, as well as the mentally ill, from buying guns. It also expands on the licensing requirements. Our third piece of history is from the Firearm Owners Protection Act of 1968, which was prompted by complaints that the federal government was abusing the power to enforce these laws. The law limits the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms from inspecting guns dealers more than once a year with follow-up inspections, allowed only for multiple violations if they are found. The law forbids the government from creating a national registry of gun ownership. The next piece of history is the Brady Handgun Violence Protection Act of 1993, which mandates the background checks of gun buyers in order to prevent sales to people prohibited under the 1968 legislation. So checks would be done by the NICS, and They couldn't be preserved by the federal law because it prohibits the creation of National Registry of Gun Ownership. And the Tyrant Amendment of 2003, which is my final piece of history, it states that it prohibits the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives from releasing data from crime gun traces. And these traces include when, where, and whom the gun from a crime was originally purchased. And in 2004, it was expanded by limiting access to government officials and prohibiting the use of these data in firearms dealer, license revocations, and civil lawsuits. So now that you got the history, let me list our 3 stock issues. Our first being the significancy claim, which is that our reason for change is valid because the current policy has loopholes that enables anyone to purchase a gun without a background check through private sellers. Our second, the inherency claim, is that the current policy causes harm because it doesn't prevent individuals from practicing background checks. Let me repeat that. The current policy causes harm because it doesn't prevent individuals from practicing background check fraud. And the third, which is pretty much us stating how this is a better proposition than the one already instated, is that the benefits of the suggested policy are valid because it will be enforced throughout the entire country instead of delegated by an individual state. And we feel that if our proposition is adopted, that this revised proposition will help background checks be more efficient, and their distribution guidelines will be clearer because it will pertain to all states and not just a few in particular.